You're sitting across from someone at dinner, and you realize mid-sentence that you're performing, not lying exactly, but curating, selecting which story to tell based on how it'll land, adjusting your laugh, monitoring their eyes for signs of engagement or boredom, and beneath this constant calibration, there's exhaustion. A specific kind of tiredness that comes from being perpetually on stage, even when you're supposed to be relaxing. You leave interactions feeling drained, not because they were difficult, but because you spent 2 hours being interesting instead of simply being. And here's what terrifies you, the thought of stopping. Because if you're not fascinating, if you're not entertaining, if you're not constantly demonstrating value through wit or insight or charisma, what's left? The voice in your head whispers its verdict. You'll be irrelevant, forgettable, the person others tolerate rather than seek out. You'll become what you fear most. That word that feels like social death, boring, so you keep performing. You keep the show running. You collect experiences not because you want them, but because they'll make good stories. You read books so you can reference them. You develop opinions so you can share them. Your life becomes material, and you become the producer of a show that never stops airing. A show where the audience's attention is your only proof of existence. But what if I told you that this fear of being boring, this relentless drive to be interesting, isn't protecting you from loneliness or irrelevance? What if the very performance you've built to avoid being invisible is precisely what's making you disappear? What if being boring is not the prison you fear, but the liberation you've been seeking without knowing its name? Most people spend their entire lives believing that their social value is something they must continuously generate. They operate from a framework that treats human interaction like entertainment, where your worth is measured by your ability to capture and hold attention. This isn't conscious. No one wakes up and thinks, today I will commodify my personality. But the framework is there, inherited from a culture that treats everything, including human presence, as content to be consumed. This is exhausting for a reason. You're trying to meet an impossible standard, being perpetually fascinating to people whose attention spans have been shattered by infinite scroll, whose baseline for stimulation has been warped by algorithmic feeds designed to hijack their dopamine systems. You're competing not just with other people, but with the entire internet's capacity to deliver novelty. And you're doing this while pretending it's effortless. Because the performance includes hiding the fact that it's a performance, Kierkegaard understood this. He wrote about the aesthetic life, the existence devoted to interesting experiences, novel sensations, the avoidance of boredom at all costs. He described people living this way as being in despair, even when they seemed successful, because they were perpetually dependent on external stimulation to feel real. They couldn't simply be. They had to be interesting, which meant they had to constantly produce themselves as objects of fascination. The self becomes a product, and products must justify their existence through market demand. Here's what actually happens in that framework. You forget who you are when no one's watching. Your internal experience becomes so subordinated to its potential external reception that you lose access to your own reality. You can't tell anymore what you genuinely enjoy versus what you think makes you look good enjoying. You can't tell what you actually think versus what makes you sound intelligent thinking. The performance colonizes everything, including your solitude. Even alone, you're rehearsing. This is what happened to you. Somewhere along the way, probably so gradually you didn't notice, your personality became a defense mechanism. Being interesting became armor against rejection. Being entertaining became a strategy for control. If you could hold their attention, they couldn't leave. If you could make them laugh, they couldn't hurt you. If you could fascinate them, you were safe. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you're a street performer, a juggler who's discovered that as long as you keep the balls in the air, people stop and watch. And when people watch, you feel seen, you feel real. So you practice constantly. You add more balls, you learn tricks, you develop a persona. The performance becomes more elaborate, more skilled, more impressive. But here's what happens. You can never stop juggling. Because the moment you do, the moment the balls hit the ground and you're just standing there on the street being ordinary, the crowd disperses. And you interpret their dispersal as proof that without the performance, you're worthless. So, you pick up the balls again. You keep juggling. Your arms ache. Your focus narrows to maintaining the pattern. You forget there was ever a time when you existed without performing. Now, one day, maybe because you're exhausted or maybe because something breaks in the mechanism, you let the balls drop. Not intentionally, not as a choice, they just fall. And for a horrible moment, you're standing there exposed, waiting for the confirmation of your irrelevance. But then, something strange happens. The crowd does disperse. Yes, most people walk away, but a few don't. A few people who were watching the performance notice you. Not the juggler, not the persona, not the show. You. And they stay, they approach, they ask if you're okay. They start a conversation, a real one. Not an exchange of performed personalities, but an actual meeting between two people who've temporarily stopped pretending to be more interesting than they are. Once your eyes adjust, you realize the performance was keeping you isolated. The very thing you thought was connecting you to people was actually preventing connection, because real intimacy requires presence, not performance. It requires the willingness to be unimpressive, to occupy time together without justifying it through entertainment value, to simply exist alongside another person without turning yourself into content. This is what's happening when you feel that exhaustion after social interactions. That's not the tiredness of connection. That's the tiredness of performing. The real you is suffocating under the weight of the interesting you. And the most tragic part is that the people you're trying so hard to impress are often doing the same thing, which means both of you are performing for each other and neither of you is actually meeting anyone. Here's what most people do when they first glimpse this dynamic. They try to become better at performing. They think, the problem is, I'm not interesting enough. So they collect more experiences, develop more opinions, craft better stories. They treat their exhaustion as insufficient conditioning rather than evidence that they're running in the wrong direction. This is like being thirsty and drinking salt water. The thirst is real. The drinking feels like addressing the problem, but you're actually making it worse. Each performance deepens your dependency on external validation. Each successful capture of attention reinforces the belief that your worth is something you must continuously prove. The hunger grows with feeding. You add more balls to the juggling act. You learn to juggle while riding a unicycle, you add fire, and the performances become more spectacular, more exhausting, more distant from anything resembling your actual self. Until one day you realize you have no idea who you'd be if you stopped performing. The mask has been on so long, you've forgotten there's a face underneath. And if this is hitting different for you, maybe it's time to join the space where we go deeper every week. You know where the button is? What's actually needed is the opposite of what instinct suggests. Not more interesting, more boring, not more performed, more present. The solution is not to become a better juggler, but to let the balls drop and discover what crap happens when you stop trying to earn your right to exist in other people's awareness. There's a specific quality of presence that emerges when you stop performing, and it doesn't have a good name in English. Let's call it undefended presence. It's the experience of being with someone without trying to manage their perception of you, without curating your responses for effect, without monitoring their engagement, without treating the interaction as a test you might fail. Undefended presence is not passive. It's not checking out or being aloof. It's actually more engaged than performance because it requires you to be genuinely responsive rather than strategically responsive. When you're performing, you're always slightly ahead of the conversation, planning your next line. When you're undefended, you're actually listening, actually responding to what's in front of you, rather than to your anxiety about how you're being perceived. This state doesn't depend on being interesting because it's not in the economy of attention capture. It's not trying to extract validation from the other person. It exists in a completely different framework, one where your value isn't being negotiated through every exchange. You're just there. They're just there. Something happens or it doesn't. It's okay either way. Here's what characterizes undefended presence. You can tolerate silence. You can let conversations end naturally without panicking and filling space. You can say, I don't know, without feeling like you're losing ground. You can be wrong without your identity collapsing. You can be unimpressive without interpreting it as failure. You can occupy time with another person without turning it into a performance review. The extraordinary thing about this state is that it's actually more magnetic than performance. Not to everyone. Many people will find you boring because they're still operating in the framework of attention economy. They're looking for entertainment, and you're no longer auditioning. But to people who've also stepped out of that framework, or who are exhausted by it, your undefended presence is profoundly attractive, because it offers something rare, the permission to stop performing themselves. Now, I must warn you about something. When I describe undefended presence, you might think it sounds rather dull. You might imagine yourself becoming one of those people who has nothing to say, who contributes nothing to conversations, who just exists passively while more interesting people carry the social weight. This concern is valid. Let me address it directly. What you're imagining is not undefended presence. What you're imagining is defended withdrawal. That's different. Defended withdrawal is still operating in the performance framework. It's just chosen invisibility as its strategy instead of fascination. It's still afraid of judgment. It's still managing perception, just through absence rather than through dazzling display. Undefended presence is not about being less engaged. It's about being engaged differently. You're still participating in conversations, still sharing yourself, still connecting, but you're not doing it from fear. You're not treating every exchange as an opportunity to prove your worth. You're not turning yourself into content. You're just there, responding genuinely to what's actually happening rather than to your anxiety about what might happen. The reason this seems boring from the outside is that our culture has confused stimulation with substance. We've been trained to equate interesting with valuable, but interesting is often just novelty, and novelty wears off. What actually sustains connection over time is not how fascinating someone is, but how real they are. Realness doesn't have the immediate pop of performance, but it has durability. It's the difference between sugar and protein. Let me tell you about someone I knew. Call him Marcus. Marcus was the most interesting person in any room. He'd lived everywhere, done everything, had opinions on topics you didn't know existed. Conversations with him were like getting hit with a fire hose of fascinating information. People loved talking to Marcus at parties. There was always a crowd around him, but if you paid attention, you'd notice something. No one really knew Marcus. Despite being surrounded by people, despite being universally liked, he had no close friends. Because every interaction was a performance. Every story was calibrated for effect. Every opinion was an opportunity to demonstrate his unique perspective. He was always on, and after a while, being around him was exhausting. Not because he was unpleasant, but because his presence demanded you be an audience rather than a person. Then, something happened. Marcus got sick. Nothing terminal, but significant enough that he had to stop traveling, stop collecting experiences, stop performing for a while. He had to just be in his apartment, uninteresting, dealing with the mundane reality of being a body that doesn't work properly. And during this time, something shifted. Maybe it was the forced stillness. Maybe it was the humiliation of needing help with basic tasks. Maybe it was just exhaustion from being interesting for so long. But when people visited him, they found someone different. Marcus still had stories, still had opinions, but he wasn't performing them anymore. He'd gotten too tired to juggle. And the extraordinary thing was, people got closer to him. Not because he became more interesting, but because he became more present. He could listen now. He could be uncertain. He could admit when he was scared or confused. He could occupy silence without filling it with performance. The sickness stripped away the armor, and what was underneath wasn't the worthless person he'd feared. It was just a person, flawed, ordinary, real. When Marcus recovered, he didn't go back to collecting interesting experiences. He still traveled occasionally, still read widely, still had conversations about ideas, but it wasn't material anymore. It wasn't content. It was just his life, lived without the constant pressure to turn it into something that would impress anyone. And the relationships he built in this new way were deeper, more sustaining, more real than anything he'd had during his years of being fascinating. This is what's available on the other side of performance. Not a diminished life, but a more direct one. Not being boring, but being unburdened. You are in the middle of this process now. The exhaustion you feel after social interactions, the growing awareness that you're performing, the suspicion that something is deeply wrong with how you've been relating to people, this isn't a problem. This is your psyche trying to get your attention. It's saying, the old strategy isn't working anymore. The cost of performing has become greater than the benefit. Something needs to die so something else can live. And it does feel like dying, because something is dying. The performed self, the curated personality, the version of you that's been working so hard to be interesting, that's what's dying. And death is uncomfortable even when it's necessary. Even when what's dying is something that was never quite real to begin with. But here's what you must understand. Underneath the performance is not nothing. Underneath the interesting you is not boring you. Underneath is just you, uncurated, unperformed, undefended, and that person is not less than the performed version. That person is actually more, because that person is real. The void you fear, the boring person you might become, that's not what's underneath. That's just what your fear imagines. What's actually there is someone who can be present, who can connect, who can occupy time and space without constantly justifying their existence through entertainment value. Someone who can be still without disappearing. Someone who can be ordinary without being worthless. So, what do you actually do with this? Here's what won't work: trying to stop performing through another performance, deciding I'm going to be authentic now and then performing authenticity, creating a new persona called the real me and curating that. This is just more juggling with different balls. What works is simpler and harder. Catch yourself performing and stop. In the middle of telling a story calibrated for effect, notice you're doing it and stop. In the middle of crafting a response designed to make you look good, notice and stop. Let the silence happen. Let yourself be unimpressive. Let the moment be ordinary. This feels like falling. It feels like social death. Your anxiety will scream that you're losing them, that you're being boring, that you need to do something interesting right now, or they'll leave. Let the anxiety scream. Don't obey it. Stay in the discomfort of being unremarkable. Stay in the silence. Stay in the ordinariness. And here's what you'll discover. Most people won't leave. Some will, yes. The ones who were there for the performance will drift away because you're no longer providing entertainment, but others will stay. And the quality of their staying is different. They're not staying to be entertained, they're staying to be with you. Practice tolerating not being the most interesting person in the room. Practice conversations where you contribute nothing impressive. Practice admitting when you don't know something, when you don't have an opinion, when you're just as confused as everyone else. Practice letting other people be interesting while you just listen. Really listen, not strategic listening where you're waiting for your turn to perform. Stop collecting experiences for their story potential. Stop reading books so you can reference them. Stop developing opinions so you can share them. Not because those things are bad, but because when you do them for performance, they're exhausting and they keep you locked in the framework of proving your worth through interesting content. If you're still here, you already know this isn't surface-level content. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper. Here's the paradox. The less you try to be interesting, the more interesting you become. Not to everyone. Not in the way that collects crowds at parties. But to the people who matter, to the people capable of real connection, your undefended presence is magnetic. Because it's so rare. Because everyone else is still performing. Because you're offering something that can't be found in the attention economy, genuine presence. Stop treating your personality as a product that needs to justify its market value. Stop monitoring engagement during interactions. Stop rehearsing conversations in your head. Stop turning your life into material. Stop performing for an imaginary audience even when you're alone. Stop trying to be fascinating and start trying to be present. And here's what to watch for. The impulse to turn even this into a performance. The temptation to become the person who's authentically boring now and making that a new identity. The urge to tell people about your journey of letting go of performance, turning your liberation into a new show. This trap is subtle. The ego is clever. It will try to recuperate even your freedom from it into a new kind of performance. The way through is not to make a big deal of it. Don't announce your transformation. Don't explain your new philosophy. Just stop performing. In small moments, in ordinary conversations, in unremarkable interactions. Let yourself be boring. Let yourself be ordinary. Let yourself take up space without justifying it through entertainment value. This is not loss, this is recovery. You're not losing your personality. You're discovering what your personality actually is when it's not constantly performing for survival. You're not becoming boring, you're becoming real. And real is so much more sustainable than interesting. Real can actually rest. Real can actually connect. Real can actually be alone without feeling like it's disappearing. The liberation you're moving toward is not the freedom to be more interesting. It's the freedom to stop trying to be interesting. It's the freedom to exist without constantly earning your right to exist. It's the freedom to be ordinary, unremarkable, even boring, and to discover that your value was never dependent on your entertainment value in the first place. Nietzsche wrote about the last man, the person who's made everything small and safe and boring. He meant it as a warning about mediocrity. But there's another way to read it. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a culture of performance is to be boring. Not checked out boring. Not defended withdrawal boring. But undefended presence boring. The boring of someone who stopped juggling, stopped performing, stopped trying to fascinate people into caring about them. This kind of boring is actually revolutionary because it refuses the entire framework of attention economy. It says, I'm not content to be consumed. I'm not a product to be marked. I'm not a personality to be optimized. I'm just a person, and my existence doesn't require your fascination to justify itself. What you're experiencing right now, this exhaustion with performing, this growing awareness of the gap between your presented self and your actual self, this isn't failure. This is your psyche initiating necessary destruction. The armor of interesting is being dismantled not because you've failed at being interesting, but because you've succeeded too well, and the success is suffocating you. Let it be dismantled. Let yourself become boring. Let the crowd disperse. Let the performance end. Let the balls drop. What you'll find in the aftermath is not the worthless person you feared, but the person who was always there underneath, waiting for the show to end so they could finally breathe. You think you're afraid of being boring, but that's not quite right. What you're actually afraid of is being alone. You've confused attention with connection, fascination with love, interesting with worthy. You've believed that if you stop performing, people will leave, and you'll be alone with the person you actually are, and that person will be insufficient. But here's the truth, you're already alone. The performance isolates you. The more you perform, the more separate you become from everyone around you. Because no one can connect with a performance. They can admire it, consume it, be entertained by it, but they can't meet it. The person performing and the person watching might occupy the same room, but they're not actually together. Real connection requires mutual presence, and presence requires dropping the performance. This means risking being boring, this means risking being ordinary. This means risking the possibility that without the armor of interesting, you might not be enough. But here's what you discover when you actually take that risk. Being enough was never about being interesting. Being enough is about being real. And if you've been resonating with this, consider staying. We explore these depths every single week. The strange power of being boring is that it's the only path to actual intimacy. Intimacy is not intimacy with the interesting parts. It's intimacy with the ordinary parts, the uncertain parts, the unimpressive parts. It's being witnessed in your unremarkable humanity and not being rejected. That's what you're actually hungry for, not fascination. Witness, not to be found interesting, but to be found real. You cannot be witnessed while you're performing because performance is designed to hide. It's designed to show only what's impressive and obscure, what's vulnerable. It's designed to manage perception, which means it's designed to prevent actual seeing. So the more successfully you perform, the more invisible your real self becomes, and the more isolated you feel despite being surrounded by people who find you fascinating. This is the trap. You perform to avoid loneliness, but the performance guarantees loneliness. Because you can never relax into connection when you're performing. You're always monitoring, always managing, always one step removed from actual presence. And the exhaustion you feel isn't just from the effort of performing, it's from the accumulated loneliness of never being fully met. What's needed is not courage exactly, it's exhaustion. You need to get tired enough of performing that the fear of being boring becomes less compelling than the hunger for rest. You need the armor to become so heavy that taking it off feels like relief rather than danger. This is what's happening to you now. The weight of maintaining interesting has finally exceeded the fear of being ordinary. So here's the practice. Stop earning your right to exist in other people's awareness. Stop trying to be fascinating. Stop treating your personality as a commodity. Stop performing. Not in a big dramatic way, just in small moments, in ordinary conversations. Let yourself be unremarkable. Let yourself be boring. Let silence happen without filling it. Let yourself be unimpressive without panicking. And pay attention to what happens, not to who leaves. Some will leave, and that's okay. Pay attention to what happens inside you. Notice the space that opens up when you're not constantly performing. Notice the energy that's freed up when you're not managing perception. Notice the quality of presence that becomes available when you stop trying to be interesting. You'll discover something. Being boring is not the prison you feared. Being boring is what you are when you stop being afraid. It's what presence looks like when it's not trying to justify itself. It's what you become when you realize your worth isn't something you have to continuously generate, but something that was always there, independent of anyone's fascination with you. The power isn't in the boring itself. The power is in the freedom from needing to be interesting. The power is in discovering that you can exist without performing, that you can connect without fascinating, that you can be ordinary and still be worth knowing. The power is in realizing that the judgment you feared you're boring has no actual power over you anymore. Let them find you boring. You're too busy being real to perform being fascinating. You spent years believing you had to earn your right to take up space through entertainment value. You spent years turning yourself into content, your life into material, your personality into a product. And it worked. In a sense, you got attention. You got validation. You got people around you. But you never got rest. You never got to relax into being yourself. You never got actual connection because no one could connect with the performance, only admire it from a distance. What if you stopped performing? What if you let yourself be boring? What if you discovered that underneath the interesting you is not the worthless you, but just you unperformed, undefended, ordinary, and completely sufficient? This is not about becoming less. This is about becoming more real. Real is boring compared to performance, in the same way that actual food is boring compared to synthetic flavoring. It's more subtle, it's less immediately stimulating, but it's what actually sustains you. You're already boring underneath the performance. Everyone's boringness is just what humans are when they're not performing. And here's the secret. Boring is only boring to people who are still addicted to stimulation, still operating in the attention economy, still treating human connection as entertainment. To people who've stepped out of that framework, your boring is beautiful. Your ordinary is magnetic. Your undefended presence is exactly what they've been looking for. The void you fear at the center of yourself, the boring person you might become if you stop performing, that was never real. That was just the story performance told you to keep you performing. What's actually at your center is not a void, but a presence. Not boring, but still. Not worthless, but sufficient. You've been running from it your whole life, terrified it wouldn't be enough, but it was always enough. You just couldn't see it through the performance. So here's the invitation, which is really a non-invitation because you can't try your way into this. Stop. Stop performing. Stop being interesting. Stop managing perception. Stop earning your right to exist. Just stop. Let yourself be boring. Let the armor drop. Let the show end. Let the balls fall. You're already there. You're already the ordinary, unremarkable, boring person you've been terrified of becoming. You've always been that person. The performance was just hiding it. And the extraordinary thing you'll discover is that boring was never the problem. Performing was the problem. Boring is just what freedom looks like when you stop being afraid of it. The void was never empty. It was just still. And you were running too fast to notice that stillness is not death. It's rest. It's presence. It's the only place where actual connection can happen. You've spent your whole life running from boring, and boring was waiting the whole time, patient and sufficient, ready to welcome you home the moment you got tired enough to stop.